Hi, and welcome to this presentation for the ESRAD 2020-25 conference called Prevalence and Reports of Quarter-Life Crisis Across 8 Countries, a Mixed Methods Study. There's a long list of authors that you can see on the screen, and I'm grateful for all of their contributions. So, what do we know about quarter-life crisis from existing literature? What is it, and when and how does it happen? So there are research studies on quarter-life crisis from Indonesia, Turkey, the UK, and from Czechia, and interview-based studies into it find that people who describe having a developmental crisis episode in the first decade of adult life, broadly the period of what's referred to as emerging adulthood, these studies find that when these crisis episodes are described, which we call quarter-life crisis, they refer to being locked out of opportunity or locked into stultifying commitments. And both of these situations of feeling locked in or locked out undermine a sense of agency and autonomy and lead to negative experiences in terms of self-esteem and negative emotions. And matters of identity, self, and authenticity are highly salient in these periods of quarter-life crisis. And one of the things is finding or experiencing a lack of congruence between inner self and outer self, so that you feel like you're one thing inwardly and you're putting on this false front outwardly, and then trying to resolve that so you feel your inner self being expressed outwardly through behavior. That's key. Periods of unemployment and relationship breakup or relationship struggles were frequently mentioned in a UK survey, which was done on quarter-life crisis, as frequent features of this experience. So as well as these inner issues of emotion and identity, you see these outer dynamics relating to the search for and establishment of a career and the search for an establishment of a long-term relationship and the dramas that pertain to that. And both of those can lead to experiences of feeling locked out or locked in. A study of quarter-life crisis using data from Twitter found a strong association with anxiety, fear about the future particularly, and UK data points towards episodes of quarter-life crisis, both leading to growth for some but decline for others. So it's very much a fork in the road. It's a very profound and salient experience of this transition and turning point of change and crisis. And it can go in a good direction. It can lead to positive change and growth, but it can create a situation in which decline may set in. Our research questions were: what is the prevalence of self-reported developmental crisis episodes in emerging adults across the UK, Greece, Czechia, Turkey, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, and Brazil? We selected these countries because they all have some literature on emerging adulthood or quarter-life crisis or both, and they represent a range of cultures and geographical locations. We then asked the research question: what emotions and events are conveyed within brief written descriptions of these crisis episodes? What's going on within them? And then what about these emotions and events? How do they compare across the participating countries? Do we see that each country has its own kind of quarter-life crisis, or that quarter-life crisis manifests broadly similarly across these very different countries? Our methodology was that we recruited participants in the 8 participating countries with separate research teams in each country. The inclusion criteria were that the participants must be aged 18 to 29 and living in the country in question. We got 2,247 individuals to provide data across those countries, and we gained both quantitative and qualitative data in this survey. And we submitted the qualitative data to a method called structured tabular thematic analysis. Now, this data form of data analysis has been devised by myself about 6 years ago. It's been used in hundreds of studies across the social sciences, and if you want to learn more about it, just Google structured tabular thematic analysis. It's designed for brief texts as opposed to long, in-depth texts. It's designed for brief texts, such as the kind that we got in this survey. This is the wording we use for assessing crisis. A crisis episode is a period in life that is noticeably more difficult, stressful, and unstable than normal, and is an important turning point in your life due to changes that occur during it. Crisis episodes typically last for several years. Would you say that you're currently experiencing a crisis episode in your life? Yes or no? So it was very much a yes or no answer, and we asked that because we needed two options so that we could either give the participants the follow-up questions or not. And if they said yes, the participants got the following open-ended questions. Please describe the main events and situations that were part of this crisis you're experiencing. And please describe the emotions you've been feeling and the thoughts you've been thinking about yourself during the crisis that you're experiencing. So we said you can see that we're only asking for 1 to 3 sentences, so that's why these are very brief written texts, but they convey a surprising amount, even though they're brief. So firstly, data on prevalence. So we asked people, do you think you're having a quarter-life crisis? Using that wording that you just got shown. And you can see on this graph that the blue part of the bar represents those who said yes. So in every single country, a lot of young adults reflect that they're in a quarter-life crisis. But that varies from 40% in Greece up to 77% in Indonesia. So it's a common denominator that it's a common experience, but it's also different in terms of the sheer amount of people who self-report as being in one of these crises. In Turkey and Indonesia, we saw in the qualitative comments, and this relates to existing literature, a tension between the traditional collectivist values of the country and the growing individualist values of the young adults, and a certain conflict there in terms of how to reconcile tradition with personal aspirations. So then we went on to our qualitative analysis. And what you can see on the left is the full list of themes, and I'll briefly read them out. So for the internal themes, such as emotions and thoughts, we had anger and irritation, confusion, exhaustion, tiredness, and feeling unmotivated, feeling fearful, anxious, and worried, feeling lost or hopeless, feeling lonely or unwanted, negative self-evaluation, other negative emotions, positive emotions, feeling down, low mood, stressed, suicidal ideation, which sadly there was in all of the countries, albeit in very small numbers. And then in the external features, we had things like addiction, substance abuse, assault, being an assaulted victim of a crime, bereavement, career change, the challenge of being an adult, family, parental difficulties, financial difficulties, identity crisis events, ill health, isolation, romantic difficulties, residential difficulties, studying, stress and struggle, transition between universities, uncertainty, uncertain direction, work stress, geopolitical or cultural context, friend-based difficulties, and others. So a range, but what you can see is they're starting to paint the picture of the challenges that young adults face, but it's very interesting when we look at which were the most common, which are the themes that came out as the most prevalent in these countries. So let's start with the external themes, so events. What's going on around these young adults, these emerging adults during the periods of crisis? So the UK had residential difficulties, studying-based stress, educational transition. I'll just put all of them on the screen so you can start to see the picture build up. And you can see a lot of commonality. So we can see, for example, that uncertain future opportunities is very common, studying-based stress is very common, financial difficulties appears multiple times, family difficulties also appears multiple times. So we can see that there is commonality, but we also have some interesting individual points. within these countries. For example, in Pakistan, this was really the only country where we saw significant numbers of young adults referring to the political and economic context as a factor in their crisis. In the UK, residential issues was the only country where that came up. This may relate to the fact that getting property in the UK is incredibly hard at the moment, and we also have a very high proportion in the UK of people who migrate to the UK during emerging adulthood, and residential difficulties can reflect the challenge of developing residential stability having moved to the UK. But a significant amount of similarities in these external themes, but even more similarities in the internal themes, which I shall just bring up on the screen now. So you can see a lot of similarity in which were the most common internal themes. Feeling sad, numb or down, feeling anxious and worried, and negative self-evaluation being the ones that come up. Not every time, but almost every time. We also have a bit of confusion, a bit of feeling lost or hopeless, and stress in Greece, which is just instead of feeling anxious, they said I'm feeling stressed. So we can see that these young adults have this similar cluster of conundrums in all countries, which represents their internal state, negatively evaluating themselves, and then this mixture of feeling perhaps sad or down about what they feel they may have lost or they imagine they've lost, but feeling anxious and worried about the future. So a few quotes now. These were the most common themes when we aggregated across the countries. Studying-based stress and struggle, uncertain future opportunities, family difficulties, negative self-evaluations, feeling anxious and worried, and feeling down. These were the most common themes. So I'm going to show you some example quotes for these now and read out some of them. If you're watching this presentation and you want to read all the themes, you can just pause and read them out. Oh, excuse me, read them to yourself. So let's start off with studying-based struggle. We can see anxious about the university. Everything coincides with everything. I think that's a powerful phrase. Everything coincides with everything. A feeling of being overwhelmed, worried about my grades, worried about my marks, worried about attendance. Used to flunk exams, bunking classes. I don't feel like I belong at university and feel like I'm worse than my classmates. Ridiculous amount of university work. I think this is a powerful quote from Brazil. Having taken a college degree I never wanted and letting that destroy my sense of self. So the sense of not acting on one's own volition, and somehow that gradually eats away at the sense of self. Uncertainties. Let's put these on the screen and read out a few. Bottom right from Pakistan, I've got no reason, rather I'm in search of it. So there's a sense of, I don't know what, I'm searching for something. I don't know, my future's uncertain. Lots of sense of uncertain future direction. In Greece, I feel no matter what I do, my life is not going anywhere, and the past comes to haunt me. A powerful quote. Lots of questioning, lots of uncertainty. Of course, this is par for the course to a degree with such a challenging part of the lifespan when such big decisions are made. But the key is that when these are mentioned as part of a crisis, this represents the fact that they're struggling to cope. Family difficulties. We can see Czechia at the bottom, pressure from parents. Turkey at the top middle saying, I'm not given much privacy by my family. India on the left saying, my parents don't understand. Pakistan, bottom right, saying, my father gives attention to my brothers. In Greece, my family still tried to control me. Brazil saying, moving back in with my parents after university was very hard. And I think what you see on the screen is the challenge of moving from a parent-to-child relationship with parents through to an adult-to-adult relationship, which should be a relationship of equals. This is very, very hard, and obviously is proving for the participants here in many in our study to be very, very difficult. Some say that it's just the lack of help from parents and lack of respect for boundaries as well. So let's go on to the thoughts and emotions. And this negative self-evaluation was very, very common, and we feel a profound feature of quarter-life crisis. I feel like a failure. I feel like I'm worthless. I feel like I'm useless. I'm not capable of doing this. I'm inadequate. I'm insecure. I'm going to fail. I feel inferior. I feel like I'm not allowed to contribute. I feel like I'm continuously in a race with claims to succeed, and something always happens and I don't finish. We saw this over and over and over across our thousands of participants, again and again and again. And so we feel that this needs to be considered as a key issue in terms of young adult mental health, the emerging adult conundrum. How do you ensure that young adults evaluate themselves in a way that's fair and realistic and doesn't create this sense of constant failure and worthlessness? Anxiety, we can see here, very anxious, very stressed, I'm afraid, intense emotions, panic attacks, worried about the future. And then I feel sad, lost, upset. I feel like I'm becoming emotionless, sort of numb. Sad, this is about breaking up with someone. Sometimes I can barely get out of bed. So this is obviously pointing towards the possibility of depression. But we feel here that many of these emotions make sense given the circumstances, the challenging circumstances that these young adults are going through. Indifferent and uninterested. Sadness drags on. Sad and overwhelmed. So this feels like a person who's at a transition and notices what they're losing, but also feels anxious about what's coming next as well. So that's this sort of concurrence of sadness and anxiety. So in conclusion, descriptions of quarter-life crisis across our 8 countries are very consistent across these diverse cultures. Once they were all the answers were translated into English, many of them looked really quite similar. Key common features of quarter-life crisis across 8 countries are uncertainty, tension, transition, changes to family dynamics, triggering, sense of anxiety, sadness, and negative self-evaluation. Considerable differences and some important culture-specific findings as well. Family challenges often relate to the challenges of living with parents, of parents putting pressure on, or of being unsupportive. And more guidance on managing the transition from parent to child to adult is definitely an important step for the future. Indeed, I can see a real considerable market for supporting families with young adults to moving in a new direction with their relationship to an adult-to-adult relationship. But then I'm just going to finish with a question. Clearly, maintaining emotional well-being and self-esteem through these crisis episodes is vital. But how do we do it? What's the best way? What are the possibilities in terms of interventions, applications, support systems to help young adults through this very challenging period of their lifespan and these very challenging episodes? Thanks very much for listening.